The weathered cowboy waited nervously for his black mail-order bride at the dusty depot. But when the wagon creaked to a halt, a towering woman twice his size stepped down with quiet dignity, while the entire frontier town erupted in cruel laughter. Onlookers whispered she'd be gone by sundown, too proud or too heartbroken to stay where she wasn't wanted. The desperate rancher who'd sent for her faced his own ruin, 60 days to pay impossible debts or lose everything his dead uncle left him. Neither knew the other held the key to a fortune that powerful men would kill to control, or that their unlikely partnership threatened to expose a conspiracy that had been bleeding the territory dry for years. Will they discover their hidden strength before the forces working against them destroy any chance of survival? Wyatt Thatcher crushed the worn photograph between his calloused fingers. The depot platform buzzed with townspeople placing bets on his humiliation. Mayor Albert Price chuckled from his spot near the general store. $10 says she takes one look at that sorry excuse for a ranch and hightails it back east. Wyatt's stomach churned. The letter in his vest pocket had arrived 3 weeks ago, confirming today's arrival. He'd spent his last decent money on a clean shirt and a shave. The alternative was losing everything. Mrs. Cornelia Webb swept dust from her store entrance. Her knowing glances made Wyatt's cheeks burn. Everyone knew his situation. The inherited ranch was drowning in debt. The tax assessments kept climbing. Without help, he'd lose his uncle's land within 2 months. Deputy Samuel Hayes leaned against a hitching post. His badge caught the afternoon sun as he whispered something to Mayor Price. Both men laughed. The wagon appeared through the heat shimmer. Dust clouds announced its approach like a funeral procession. Wyatt straightened his shoulders. Whatever happened next would determine his future. The driver pulled his horses to a stop. Conversations died. Every eye focused on the canvas covering. A hand emerged first. Dark skin, strong fingers. Then a boot touched the ground. Then another. The woman who stepped into the sunlight stood nearly a foot taller than any man present. Josephine Lincoln surveyed the crowd with calm dignity. Her traveling dress was simple but clean. Her posture spoke of education and confidence. She was magnificent and terrifying. The silence stretched like a held breath. Then the laughter exploded. Sweet mercy, Thatcher got himself a giant. She could probably carry him to the altar. Might need to reinforce that wedding bed. Mayor Price stepped forward with theatrical concern. Miss, I believe there's been some terrible mistake. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable returning to wherever you came from. Jo reached into her traveling bag. She produced a leather portfolio and extracted a contract. I have business here, sir, with Mr. Thatcher. Her voice carried the precise diction of someone educated back east. Wyatt felt his world tilting sideways. The woman in the photograph had seemed so small, so manageable. Wyatt Thatcher. Joe's gaze found his across the crowd. He nodded, unable to speak. She walked toward him with measured steps. The crowd parted like water. Up close, she was even more imposing. Her eyes held intelligence that made him feel exposed. I believe we have an arrangement. She handed him the contract. His name was there in black ink, his signature at the bottom, the marriage agreement he'd signed in desperate hope. Yes, ma'am. The words barely escaped his throat. Mayor Price inserted himself between them. Now hold on there, Thatcher. Surely you want to reconsider this whole situation. A man has rights after all. Joe's eyes never left Wyatt's face. Do you want to reconsider, Mr. Thatcher? The question hung in the desert air. Everyone waited. His ranch needed help. His debts wouldn't disappear. This woman had traveled over 1,000 miles based on his word. No, ma'am, a deal's a deal. Relief flickered across Joe's features. She nodded once. Then perhaps you could show me to your home. The ride to his ranch passed in uncomfortable silence. Joe sat straight-backed beside him on the wagon seat. She studied everything they passed. The land markers, the survey stakes, the irrigation ditches. Interesting territory, she said finally. Not much to look at. I disagree. Her tone was thoughtful. The land formations are quite distinctive. Wyatt had no idea what that meant. Land was land, dirt and rocks and the occasional water source. His ranch house appeared over a small rise. The building needed paint and new shingles. The barn leaned slightly eastward. The whole place screamed poverty and neglect. Joe climbed down from the wagon before he could offer assistance. She walked to the well and peered down into its depths. How deep? About 30 feet. Uncle dug it himself. She nodded as if filing away important information. Then she noticed the papers scattered across his kitchen table. What are these? Came with the property, survey stuff, tax papers, legal nonsense I can't make heads or tails of. Joe's hands moved over the documents with surprising care. Her eyes widened slightly as she read. For a moment her composure cracked. Your uncle left you all of this. The land and the debts that come with it. Lucky me. Joe studied a particular survey map for a long moment. Her finger traced certain markings that meant nothing to Wyatt. When she looked up, something had changed in her expression. Mr. Thatcher, I think we need to discuss exactly what you've inherited. If you are enjoying this story of how an unexpected arrival will change everything forever, don't forget to comment where you are tuning in from to show how this story can connect us across any distances, backgrounds, and hearts. Because what will happen in the next part in this frontier town will completely change both their lives and the entire community. Mayor Price arrived 3 days later with Deputy Hayes and a stack of official papers. His smile was all teeth and no warmth. Thatcher, I'm afraid there's been an adjustment to your tax assessment. Seems the territory values your property higher than previously calculated. Wyatt's hands shook as he read the document. The amount had tripled overnight. This can't be right. Uncle never paid anything close to this. Times change. Development brings value. You've got 60 days to settle up or face foreclosure proceedings. Joe emerged from the kitchen where she'd been studying the survey maps. Price's eyes narrowed when he saw her. Still here, I see. Most sensible folks would have moved on by now. I find the area quite fascinating, Mayor Price, especially the geological features. Something flickered in Price's expression. Fear, maybe, or calculation. Can't imagine what a city girl would find interesting about rocks and dirt. Water tables can be surprisingly complex in desert regions. Price left without another word. Hayes followed, casting nervous glances over his shoulder. Joe waited until the dust settled before speaking. Your uncle was a very intelligent man, Mr. Thatcher. Smart enough to die broke, apparently. I don't think he was broke at all. I think he was very, very rich. Joe spread the survey maps across the kitchen table. Her finger traced blue lines that crisscrossed the property boundaries. These markings indicate underground water sources. Not just a well or two, an entire aquifer system. Wyatt squinted at the meaningless symbols. What's that mean in plain English? It means you're sitting on enough fresh water to supply half the territory. Water rights in Arizona are worth more than gold. The words hit him like a physical blow. Rich. The ranch that was supposed to bankrupt him was actually worth a fortune. How do you know all this? Joe's expression grew distant. She moved to the window and stared across the desert landscape. My father was a geological surveyor for the Pennsylvania Railroad. I spent my childhood following him across 3 states, learning to read land formations and identify water sources. She turned back to face him. When I was 12, we discovered a massive aquifer near Pittsburgh. The railroad bought the water rights for $50,000, enough to make a dozen families wealthy for life. What happened to your father? Lung fever took him when I was 16. Mother died 2 years later. I used their savings to attend teachers' college in Philadelphia. Her voice hardened. Until the bank foreclosed on our family farm while I was away at school. Wyatt understood that particular pain. Losing land felt like losing pieces of your soul. The farm was built over another aquifer system. The bank knew it when they took the property. They sold the water rights to a mining company for 10 times what we owed. Joe returned to the maps with renewed intensity. Her educated eye read the landscape like other people read books. Your uncle marked every water source on this property. He knew exactly what he owned. These aren't random survey marks. They're a treasure map. Then why didn't he develop it? Because someone was watching. Someone who wanted to acquire the land cheaply before anyone realized its true value. The implication struck Wyatt like lightning. Mayor Price's sudden interest in tax assessments, the inflated property values, the pressure to sell quickly. Price knows. I believe he's known for some time. The question is what he plans to do about it. Jo spent the next 2 weeks putting her knowledge to work. She identified the optimal locations for new wells based on the underground water flow patterns. Her suggestions seemed minor to Wyatt, but the results were dramatic. The first new well produced 3 times the water output of Uncle's original dig. The second hit an underground stream that had never run dry in living memory. Within days, the ranch was producing more water than they could use. The garden exploded with growth. The livestock fattened on abundant feed grown with reliable irrigation. Word spread through the territory like wildfire. Ranchers who'd struggled with drought for decades came to see the miracle water source. Some offered to buy access rights on the spot. Jo managed every inquiry with careful calculation. She quoted prices that made Wyatt dizzy. Water access fees that could pay off his debts 10 times over. "We could be rich within a year," she told him one evening. The question hung between them. Their marriage was legal but not real, a business arrangement born of mutual desperation. "I have nowhere else to go, Mr. Thatcher, and you need someone who understands water law and mineral rights." It's Wyatt, and yeah, I reckon I do. Something shifted in their relationship that night. Partnership instead of obligation. Mutual respect instead of awkward politeness. But Mayor Price was watching. The next morning brought another visit from Deputy Hayes. This time he came alone and nervous. "Wyatt, I'm supposed to investigate reports of illegal water usage on your property." "Illegal how?" "Price says you're exceeding your permitted allocation, violating territorial conservation laws." Jo appeared beside Wyatt before he could respond. "Deputy Hayes, could you show us the documentation for these alleged violations?" Hayes shuffled his feet. "I'm sure the mayor has all the paperwork back in town." "I'm sure he does." Joe's smile was sharp as a blade. "Perhaps you could ask him to provide copies of the specific statutes we're allegedly breaking, along with the measurements he's using to calculate our usage." Hayes left without taking any enforcement action, but the message was clear. Mayor Price was escalating his campaign to force them off the land. The question was how far he'd go to get what he wanted. Jo spent her evenings in town, asking careful questions and listening to frustrated ranchers. The pattern emerged slowly but clearly. Mayor Price had been buying land rights around their property for months, always at below-market prices, always from desperate sellers facing impossible tax burdens. The Henderson Ranch, foreclosed last spring. The Murphy Homestead, sold for back taxes in June. The Wilson Spread, purchased by the territory after mysterious legal complications. Every property formed a ring around Wyatt's land. Mrs. Webb proved surprisingly helpful during Joe's visits to the general store. "Been wondering when someone would notice," the older woman said while measuring flour. "Price has been awfully interested in that particular section of territory. Any idea why?" "Surveyors came through about 6 months ago. Railroad men, by the look of their equipment. They spent considerable time around your husband's property." Joe's blood chilled. Railroad companies didn't survey random desert unless they planned major development. Development that required massive water supplies. She found the proof in the Territorial Land Office. Hours of searching through filing cabinets revealed Price's true activities. Purchase agreements signed with something called the Southwest Development Corporation. Water rights transfers dated but not yet executed. A carefully orchestrated conspiracy to control the region's most valuable resource. The Southwest Development Corporation was a shell company. Further investigation revealed its true ownership, the Santa Fe and Pacific Railroad. Joe's hands trembled as she copied the documents. The railroad planned to route a major line through the territory. The water rights price was accumulating would supply the entire operation. Locomotive maintenance, town development, agricultural expansion along the route. The scheme would make Price wealthy beyond imagination. It would also rob every local rancher of their land's true value. That night, Joe shared her discoveries with Wyatt. The railroad needs water rights for their planned expansion. Price has been systematically acquiring them at fraudulent prices. Your property contains the largest aquifer, so it's the keystone of the entire operation. Wyatt studied the copied documents with growing anger. How long has this been going on? At least a year, maybe longer. Price has been positioning himself to control the territory's water supply before anyone realizes what it's worth. And if we don't sell, he'll find ways to force us. Legal challenges, tax increases, regulatory violations, anything to make keeping the land impossible. The proof came 3 days later. A team of territorial inspectors arrived with official complaints about their water usage, livestock management, and property maintenance. Violations that could result in immediate foreclosure. Joe met them at the property line with her own documentation. Water usage calculations based on legitimate territorial allocations. Geological surveys proving their wells accessed private groundwater, not public resources. Property maintenance records showing continuous improvement. The inspectors left without finding actionable violations. But Joe knew Price would try again with different tactics. She began her own systematic campaign. Every evening brought visits to neighboring ranches, patient conversations about water rights and property values, educational discussions about geological surveys and mineral law. Her teaching background proved invaluable. Complex legal concepts became understandable when explained properly. Frustrated ranchers began asking intelligent questions about their own land's potential. "Price told me my property was worthless scrubland," said Tom Crawford, whose ranch bordered 3 others Price had acquired. But these survey markings suggest otherwise. Joe helped Crawford interpret his geological data. His property contained significant underground water sources, water rights worth 10 times what Price had offered. Similar discoveries followed at ranch after ranch. The scope of Price's fraud became undeniable. Dozens of families had been cheated out of their land's true value. The coalition grew organically. Ranchers who'd been isolated by financial struggles found common cause against systematic exploitation. Joe provided the knowledge and organizational skills to transform individual grievances into collective action. Mrs. Webb became an unofficial intelligence source, reporting on Price's activities and connections. Deputy Hayes began expressing private doubts about the mayor's increasingly desperate tactics. "Something's got Price spooked," Hayes confided during one of Joe's town visits. "He's pushing to accelerate land acquisitions, talking about bringing in territorial marshals to enforce tax collections." The territorial governor's scheduled visit provided the perfect opportunity. Governor Murphy was known for his intolerance of local corruption. His autumn tour would bring him through their territory in 6 weeks. Joe spent those weeks building an ironclad case. Documented evidence of Price's fraudulent tax assessments, proof of his secret partnership with the railroad corporation, testimony from ranchers who'd been systematically cheated. Her organizational skills transformed individual complaints into a comprehensive legal challenge. Every document was properly filed. Every witness statement was notarized. Every piece of evidence was cross-referenced and verified. Wyatt watched his wife's transformation with growing admiration. The quiet woman who'd stepped off the wagon had become a formidable advocate for justice. "You're going to expose the whole thing, aren't you? I'm going to make sure everyone gets fair compensation for their land's true value, including us." Price made his final desperate move 2 weeks before the governor's arrival. A notice of immediate foreclosure based on violations of an obscure territorial statute about foreign investment in water resources. The legal challenge questioned Joe's right to own property as an out-of-territory resident. If successful, it would invalidate their marriage's legal standing and eliminate their claim to the land. Joe read the documents with cold fury. Price was attacking the legitimacy of their union to steal their property. He's going to claim our marriage is fraudulent because I'm not from Arizona territory. If he can prove that, he can seize the land for back taxes and unpaid fees. Wyatt's jaw tightened. Over my dead body. We won't need violence, Wyatt. We have something better. We have the truth. Joe transformed the schoolhouse into her headquarters. Every evening brought ranchers and their families seeking answers about their property rights. She spread geological surveys across makeshift tables, teaching neighbors to read the symbols that revealed their land's hidden wealth. Tom Crawford brought his entire family to learn about water law. His wife Sarah clutched their property deed, while Joe explained how underground aquifers worked. This blue marking indicates a natural spring system beneath your eastern pasture. The water rights alone are worth more than your entire mortgage. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Price offered us $50 for the whole spread, said it wasn't worth the taxes we owe. It's worth at least $5,000, possibly more once the railroad development begins. Word spread through the territory like wildfire. Families who'd been preparing to abandon their homesteads discovered they were sitting on fortunes. Joe's patient teaching revealed the scope of Price's systematic fraud. Mrs. Webb provided crucial intelligence about Price's growing desperation. The mayor had begun meeting with railroad representatives in secret. His communications with territorial officials increased dramatically. He's trying to fast-track the foreclosure processes, Webb reported. Wants to complete the land acquisitions before Governor Murphy arrives. Joe worked 18-hour days building legal documentation. Her teaching background proved invaluable for organizing complex evidence into comprehensible arguments. Every fraudulent tax assessment was cataloged. Every forged document was identified. Every victim's story was properly recorded. Deputy Hayes began visiting Joe directly instead of following Price's orders. The evidence of corruption had shaken his loyalty to the mayor. Price wants me to arrest you for inciting civil unrest, claims you're organizing an illegal rebellion against territorial authority. Are you going to arrest me, Deputy? Hayes studied the evidence spread across Joe's tables. Geological surveys, legal documents, witness statements. The case against Price was overwhelming. No, ma'am, I don't think I am. Joe's coalition expanded beyond the immediate area. Ranchers from 3 counties brought their property documents for evaluation. The pattern of fraud extended far beyond their territory. Price's corruption had affected hundreds of families across the region. The schoolhouse became a center of resistance against systematic exploitation. Joe taught groups of farmers how to file legal challenges. She explained water rights law to families who'd never understood their own property values. Her knowledge transformed confusion into empowerment. Wyatt watched his wife's transformation with growing pride. The community that had mocked her arrival now sought her guidance and respected her intelligence. You've become their leader, he observed one evening. I've become their teacher. There's a difference. Joe's systematic approach uncovered additional layers of Price's conspiracy. The mayor had been falsifying territorial reports about water scarcity to justify his emergency land acquisitions. He'd bribed assessors to undervalue properties containing valuable resources. He'd manipulated legal processes to force rapid sales. The evidence filled 3 crates by the time Governor Murphy's visit approached. Joe organized everything with methodical precision. Each document was labeled, dated, and cross-referenced. Every witness statement included supporting evidence. The case against Price was bulletproof. Price made his final desperate gambit 1 week before the governor's arrival. A team of territorial marshals appeared with warrants for Joe's arrest on charges of fraud and conspiracy against territorial government. Josephine Lincoln is accused of impersonating a legal resident for purposes of illegal land speculation. She will be detained pending territorial review of her residency status. Wyatt stepped between the marshals and his wife. She's Josephine Thatcher now, legal resident by marriage. The marriage is under investigation for fraud. Until resolved, she has no legal standing in territorial matters. Joe remained calm despite the threat of imprisonment. May I see the documentation supporting these charges? The lead marshal produced papers bearing Price's signature and official territorial seals. Joe examined them with the same careful attention she'd given every other document in her investigation. These warrants are based on false information provided by Mayor Price. I have evidence proving his statements are fraudulent. That's for the territorial court to decide, ma'am. You'll need to come with us. Mrs. Webb appeared with half the town following behind her. The crowd included every rancher Joe had helped, every family she'd taught about their rights. Where exactly do you plan to take her? Webb demanded. Territorial jail in Phoenix, pending formal charges. Tom Crawford stepped forward with his property documents. This woman saved my family from losing our ranch. She exposed fraud that would have cost us everything. Other voices joined his. Testimony about Joe's integrity, her knowledge, her dedication to justice. The crowd grew larger as more families arrived to support the woman who'd fought for their rights. The marshals found themselves surrounded by angry citizens demanding answers. Their authority seemed less certain when faced with organized community resistance. Joe raised her hand for silence. I'll go with the marshals if necessary, but I request the opportunity to present evidence to Governor Murphy when he arrives. Evidence that will prove these charges are part of a larger conspiracy. The lead marshal consulted quietly with his colleagues. Arresting Joe would require forcing their way through dozens of protective citizens. The situation could escalate beyond their ability to control. You have until the governor's departure to resolve these matters through proper channels. Any attempt to flee will result in immediate pursuit and arrest. The marshals withdrew, but their threat remained. Joe had 3 days to prove her innocence and expose Price's corruption before facing imprisonment. The entire case now depended on successfully presenting evidence to Governor Murphy during his brief territorial visit. Governor Murphy arrived with a formal entourage and obvious irritation about the territorial complaints flooding his office. The town hall overflowed with ranchers, their families, and curious observers drawn by weeks of mounting tension. Mayor Price had prepared his own presentation. Official documents, territorial assessments, and character witnesses ready to testify about Joe's fraudulent activities and illegal land speculation. Governor Murphy, this woman has been inciting civil unrest and challenging legitimate territorial authority. Her influence has disrupted proper legal processes and encouraged resistance to lawful tax collection. Price's confidence radiated through the packed room. He'd orchestrated similar proceedings before, relying on official authority to overwhelm individual complaints. Governor Murphy examined Price's documentation with practiced efficiency. These are serious charges, Mayor Price. What evidence supports your claims of fraud? Mrs. Lincoln arrived under false pretenses, claiming residency rights she doesn't possess. She's manipulated vulnerable ranchers into believing their property has value it doesn't possess. Her actions have cost the territory significant revenue. Joe rose from her seat in the crowd. Her presence commanded immediate attention despite attempts to diminish her credibility. Governor Murphy, I request permission to respond to these charges with documented evidence. You may proceed, Mrs. Thatcher. The correction of her name was deliberate and significant. Joe moved to the front of the room carrying her carefully organized case materials. Mayor Price has systematically defrauded territorial citizens through falsified tax assessments, hidden geological reports, and secret partnerships with railroad corporations. She placed the first document on the table before Governor Murphy, a genuine territorial survey showing massive aquifer systems beneath local ranches. This official report was filed 6 months ago but never disclosed to property owners. It proves their land contains water rights worth millions of dollars. Price's expression shifted from confidence to concern. Those surveys are preliminary and unreliable. Joe produced a second document. This is correspondence between Mayor Price and the Southwest Development Corporation, a shell company owned by the Santa Fe and Pacific Railroad. It details their plan to acquire water rights at fraudulent prices. Governor Murphy studied the railroad correspondence with growing interest. Corporate conspiracies to manipulate territorial resources fell under direct gubernatorial authority. Continue, Mrs. Thatcher. Joe's presentation methodically dismantled Price's entire operation. Falsified tax records designed to force land sales. Bribed assessors who undervalued properties containing valuable resources. Legal challenges based on manufactured violations. Mayor Price has stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars in property value from territorial citizens. The affected families include the Crawfords, the Hendersons, the Murphys, and dozens of others. Tom Crawford stood up in the crowd. Joe taught us to read our own property surveys. Price told us our land was worthless, but the geological reports show massive water sources. Other voices joined his testimony. Family after family described Price's fraudulent offers and pressure tactics. The scope of the conspiracy became undeniable. Governor Murphy's expression hardened as the evidence accumulated. Mayor Price, how do you respond to these allegations? Price's composure cracked under the weight of documented proof. These people are confused about complex territorial law. Mrs. Lincoln has filled their heads with unrealistic expectations. Joe placed her final piece of evidence before the governor. Price's signed agreement with the Railroad Corporation, promising exclusive access to territorial water rights in exchange for personal compensation. This contract proves Mayor Price has been working against territorial interests for personal profit. He's betrayed his oath of office and defrauded the citizens he swore to serve. The room fell silent as Governor Murphy examined the railroad contract. Price's signature was clearly visible alongside corporate seals and financial terms. Mayor Price, is this your signature? Price's face had gone pale. His carefully constructed defense collapsed in the face of irrefutable evidence. I was protecting territorial interests. The railroad development will bring prosperity to the region. By stealing property rights from territorial citizens, Joe stepped forward with quiet authority. Governor Murphy, these families deserve fair compensation for their land's true value. The water rights alone represent generational wealth that Mayor Price attempted to steal. Governor Murphy addressed the crowd directly. How many families have been affected by these fraudulent practices? Hands rose throughout the room. Dozens of families, representing hundreds of territorial citizens. The scope of Price's corruption dwarfed typical local political scandals. Mrs. Webb stood up with her own testimony. Governor Murphy, Mrs. Thatcher has worked tirelessly to expose this conspiracy. She's taught our community to understand our own rights and protect our property values. Deputy Hayes stepped forward, his badge in his hand. Governor Murphy, I was manipulated into enforcing illegal orders. Mrs. Thatcher's evidence proves Mayor Price has been lying to territorial authorities. The political implications were staggering. A corrupt mayor conspiring with railroad interests to defraud territorial citizens represented exactly the kind of exploitation Governor Murphy had campaigned against. Wyatt rose from his seat, his voice carrying across the packed room. Governor Murphy, my wife risked everything to fight for justice. She could have stayed quiet and kept our own profits, but she chose to help our neighbors recover what was stolen from them. Governor Murphy's decision was swift and decisive. Mayor Price, you are hereby removed from office and will face territorial charges for fraud, conspiracy, and violation of your oath of office. All land transactions and tax assessments conducted under your authority will be reviewed for legitimacy. Price's political career ended in that moment. His conspiracy to control territorial water rights crumbled under the weight of Joe's methodical investigation. Mrs. Thatcher, The territory owes you significant gratitude for exposing this corruption. Your evidence has prevented a massive theft of citizen resources." The room erupted in cheers and applause. Joe had achieved complete victory through intelligence, organization, and unwavering commitment to justice. The territorial investigation moved swiftly once Governor Murphy returned to Phoenix. Price's financial records revealed the full scope of his corruption: bank accounts containing railroad money, property deeds acquired through fraudulent means, tax assessments inflated to force desperate sales. Within 2 weeks, territorial marshals arrested Price on charges of conspiracy, fraud, and violation of public trust. His assets were frozen pending restitution to affected families. The man who'd terrorized ranchers for months found himself facing decades in territorial prison. Deputy Hayes received a commendation for his cooperation with the investigation. His testimony about Price's illegal orders helped prosecutors build an airtight case against the former mayor. The railroad corporation faced its own consequences. Governor Murphy voided their fraudulent water rights acquisitions and demanded fair market compensation for all affected properties. The Santa Fe and Pacific Railroad discovered that stealing from territorial citizens carried steep penalties. Joe's marriage to Wyatt was officially validated with new territorial documentation. Her residency status was confirmed through proper legal channels. The charges against her disappeared along with the corrupt mayor who'd fabricated them. The transformation of their community began immediately. Tom Crawford's family received $3,500 in compensation for their water rights. The money allowed them to expand their ranch and secure their children's future. The Henderson family recovered their foreclosed property, along with damages for wrongful seizure. The Murphys got back their homestead plus compensation for months of illegal occupation by Price's associates. Dozens of families discovered their true wealth through Joe's continued education efforts. She established regular classes in the schoolhouse, teaching geological survey interpretation and water rights law, knowledge that would protect future generations from similar exploitation. Mrs. Webb became the interim mayor while the territory organized proper elections. Her first official act was commissioning a memorial to honest governance and citizen education. The plaque bore Joe's name as the woman who'd saved their community from systematic fraud. The water cooperative Joe had proposed became reality within months. 17 families pooled their resources to create sustainable irrigation systems and shared well maintenance. The collective approach ensured fair distribution while maximizing efficiency. Wyatt's ranch prospered beyond his wildest dreams. The aquifer system Joe had identified supported expanded agriculture and livestock operations. Their property value increased tenfold once the water rights were properly documented and legally protected. More importantly, their marriage evolved from desperate arrangement to genuine partnership. Wyatt's respect for Joe's intelligence grew into deep affection. Her appreciation for his integrity and loyalty blossomed into love. The railroad eventually completed their route through the territory, but under proper legal agreements. They paid fair market prices for water access rights. The development brought prosperity to the region without exploiting local families. Joe's reputation spread throughout Arizona territory. Other communities facing similar corruption invited her to investigate suspicious land deals and fraudulent tax assessments. She became an unofficial territorial consultant on water rights and geological surveys. Governor Murphy appointed Joe to the Territorial Water Rights Commission. Her expertise in geological surveying and her commitment to protecting citizen interests made her invaluable for policy development. She was the first woman to hold such a position in territorial government. The schoolhouse expanded to accommodate Joe's growing education programs. She taught children to read survey maps and understand property law. Adult classes covered topics from mineral rights to agricultural water management. Knowledge became the community's best defense against future exploitation. Wyatt joined Joe's educational efforts, sharing practical ranching knowledge that complemented her scientific expertise. Their partnership extended beyond marriage into community leadership and economic development. The couple's first child arrived 18 months after Governor Murphy's investigation. Little Sarah Thatcher was born into a community transformed by her mother's courage and intelligence. The daughter of a mail-order bride who'd become a territorial leader. Price's conviction brought a 20-year prison sentence and complete financial restitution to his victims. The man who'd terrorized families lost everything he'd stolen and faced decades of hard labor in territorial prison. Justice served without violence or revenge, achieved through truth and legal process. The railroad conspiracy investigation expanded to other territories. Price's cooperation with prosecutors revealed similar schemes across the Southwest. Joe's evidence helped expose a network of corrupt officials stealing from citizens throughout the region. 5 years after her arrival, Joe stood before the territorial legislature presenting testimony about water rights protection. The awkward woman who'd stepped off the wagon had become one of Arizona's most respected voices on natural resource law. The legislation she championed became known as the Thatcher Water Rights Act. It required public disclosure of all geological surveys and prohibited secret corporate agreements for resource extraction. Future generations of territorial citizens would be protected from the exploitation Joe had exposed. Wyatt accompanied Joe to the legislative sessions, proud of his wife's achievements and grateful for the partnership that had saved them both. Their marriage had begun with mutual desperation, but grown into something far more valuable than the water rights that made them wealthy. Their ranch became a model for sustainable water management and cooperative agriculture. Visitors from across the territory came to learn Joe's methods for maximizing productivity while preserving natural resources. The schoolhouse where Joe had organized her resistance to corruption became a permanent education center. The Thatcher Institute for Geological Education offered courses in surveying, water law, and natural resource management. Students came from throughout the Southwest to learn from the woman who'd exposed one of the territory's largest fraud conspiracies. Joe's story spread beyond Arizona territory, inspiring other communities to question corrupt local officials and demand honest governance. Her methods of patient investigation, systematic evidence gathering, and community education became a model for grassroots justice movements. The woman who'd been mocked for her size and dismissed for her background had transformed not just one community, but an entire territory's approach to protecting citizen rights and natural resources.